The Valar, the powers of the world, the Holy Ones created as the offspring of Iluvatar's thought, before creation itself came to be, the greatest spirits of the Ainur. Following the music of the Ainur, many of these spirits created by Eru descended into the world at the beginning of time, and we are told in the Silmarillion that it was their duty to fulfill the vision Iluvatar had shown them, created from their music, to labour in the regions of Ea, vast beyond the thoughts of elves and men, until in the time appointed was made Arda, the kingdom of earth. They would descend into it, and would dwell within it until its end. The mightiest of the Ainur who descended into the world was in his beginning Melkor, a name he would forfeit through treachery and evil, being known later by his enemies as Morgoth. He would squander his strength in violence and tyranny, tormenting those within Arda, coveting all that was in it, desiring the kingship and dominion over the realms of his peers. Those peers were the rest of the Valar, led by the King of Arda, Manwë, dearest to Iluvatar. He was the first of all kings, lord of all that dwelt within Arda. He was brother to Melkor in the mind of Eru, and as vicegerent he was the authoritative representative of Eru on earth, the one others would look to for the safeguarding and fulfillment of Arda. Why then was Melkor allowed to commit atrocities, to place his own great power within the earth, infecting the lives of those who dwelt within and who would later come to be? The Valar, and especially Manwë, seem to be controversial figures in many discussions surrounding the action or inaction of those who at least would have some chance of defeating Melkor, a greater chance than elves and men standing against a godlike tyrant, partly responsible for the world they are living in. A foe so incomprehensibly great that he was still beyond their reckoning at his lowest point on earth after squandering his gifts. Some blame the Valar for the suffering of countless lives in Middle-earth, and Manwë is judged as weak or lacking care and pity for those Melkor tortured during his time in Middle-earth, until the tyrant was finally cast out. I want to share Tolkien's thoughts on the so-called folly of Manwë and the weakness of the Valar. This is not my attempt to sway those who blame the Valar, even partly, for the evil of Melkor that flourished longer than it should have. This is my attempt to explain the role of the Elder King, Manwë, to explain his purpose and duty, why it's not so easy to judge when we are told of Melkor's free will and his right to exist, and how the action, or again inaction, of the Valar limited the fall of members of their order to only one. It is a look at what makes good figures good, and why remaining good can mean making the toughest of decisions and carrying the greatest of burdens. In discussions like these, I always try to make clear that I am attempting to explain Tolkien's own thoughts on such matters. It is never my intention to act as an apologist or apply my own real-world beliefs into the discussion, but I also do think that Tolkien's thoughts when it comes to the seemingly free reign of Melkor to commit evil acts, and the reasons the Valar, and Manwë especially, acted as they did, go unheard in many cases. Apparently, we know better than Manwë. We would have done this or that to annihilate Melkor and save the world if we had the strength of the Valar at our disposal. We also have the gift of hindsight, and none of the responsibility of such figures. If I could fully comprehend the mind of Manwë, then I'd be as great as him, and I'm not. This is the attitude I tend to take when reading Tolkien's examination of just what happened with the Valar when dealing with Melkor. Despite being divine beings, none of the Valar are Eru. They are capable of mistakes, and they are capable of greater mistakes in their attempt to correct earlier ones. With the responsibility of bringing the vision of Arda to fruition as governors of Eru, there arguably cannot be a greater responsibility. And to then have responsibility over elves and men adds a greater challenge. Beings created by Eru without the involvement of the Ainur at all. They do not fully understand elves, and especially men, with their strange gifts. How much interference is too much? Will it affect the plan of Eru and the destiny of his children, if they step in too often. This leads to taking elves out of Middle-earth before their time, leaving men to awaken in Middle-earth later without many of the elves who would have guided them. It leads to elves now dwelling in Aman rebelling, the exile of many of them who would only return in death. Mistakes lead to the rise of the greatest kingdom of men, who are told not to journey too far west, but who are left to grow in their resentment and fear until they violently assault the uttermost west, resulting in the kingdom's end. And it leads to the greatest servant of Morgoth, believing he now has free reign to assume authority over all who dwell in Middle-earth. Thousands of years of hardship and war. Again, I am not claiming the Valar are perfect, nor do I envy them of their duty. Mistakes were made. Different approaches had to be taken due to catastrophic errors of judgment. Choices far beyond any that would be made by anyone beneath the authority of the Valar in Middle-earth. And when figures with such authority aren't perfect, then the wrong decision can have an effect on the entire world. Tolkien himself accepted rightly that, in this mythology, all the angelic powers concerned with this world were capable of many degrees of error and failing. Between the absolute satanic rebellion and evil of Morgoth and his satellite Sauron, and the variance of some of the other higher powers or gods. What will follow is my defense for the defense of Manwë and the Valar, and I'm going to be discussing Tolkien's words here. Don't shoot the messenger. In the Asanwe Kenta, following a discussion about Melkor's gifts in language and ability to torment others through lies, deceit, or just the sheer terror of his presence, Tolkien asks us to beware how we judge the folly of Manwë and the weakness and unwariness of the Valar when it comes to Melkor. Many of us may be amazed or grieved to witness Melkor deceiving others with ease, with Manwë appearing almost like a simpleton when compared to Melkor, as if a kind but unwise father were treating a wayward child who would assuredly in time perceive the error of his ways. Whereas we, looking on and knowing the outcome, see now that Melkor knew well the error of his ways, but was fixed in them by hate and pride beyond return. This is the hindsight I spoke of earlier. Much in the same way people dissect the Lord of the Rings and ask why Sauron didn't do this or that because what he chose to do led to his downfall. It's easy for us to attempt to think of greater solutions when we know a previous one failed. But with Melkor, he was fully capable of reading the mind of Manwë, a being who in his innocence left the door open for his mind to be perceived. I say innocence and not foolish naivety. We should grieve for the fact that Manwë had to suffer the deceit and lies of evil in order to comprehend it, a loss of purity that brought him in line with all others who would suffer under evil. To call him naive or foolish for this is to accept that evil will infect everything and not be bothered by that. With Melkor's own mind, the door was open, but his own mind was false, with doors of iron remaining closed forever. Manwë would perceive what Melkor would want him to perceive, and would hide his true intentions and hatreds in the dark depths of his mind. Such deceit had never been encountered before. Why would Manwë attempt to find it? A figure like Tulkas, slow to forgive, would not allow a figure like Melkor the chance to even deceive him. This may sound good, but in being slow to forgive or to never allow the chance, would surely push a figure further onto the wrong path. It was unknown to Manwë at the time that Melkor had fallen so low that returning to the fold was almost out of the question. But the door at this time was open in Manwë's judgment, a chance for Melkor to understand the error of his ways and walk again on the path of Eru. This is why Manwë, not Tulkas, is the one who best understands the mind of Eru, and why he is the King of Arda. The King of Arda cannot be slow to forgive. He must offer a chance. Tolkien asks if we would have Manwë and the Valar meet the secrecy of Melkor with subterfuge, his treachery with falsehoods of their own, fighting his lies with more lies. If Melkor would usurp their rights, should the Valar deny his in turn? Can hate overcome hate. Nay, Manwë was wiser, or being ever open to Eru he did his will, which is more than wisdom. He was ever open because he had nothing to conceal, no thought that it was harmful for any to know, if they could comprehend it. In these matters, Melkor was no fool. He knew that Manwë would follow the rules set out by Eru, his commands and injunctions. He would do this, or abstain from that, in order to follow them, always, even if he would learn that Melkor would break those rules if it suited his own purpose. This is what distinguishes good characters from those who follow another path. To act as they would is to fall to their level. An example should be set, and as King of Arda, Manwë is the example to all. An example of what I am talking about would be the parley at the Black Gate during the events of The Lord of the Rings. As the fallen servant of Sauron, titled The Mouth of Sauron, shares his poisonous words with Aragorn, threatening his allies, boasting of the death of Frodo, and acting without the dignity that should be carried by all emissaries and messengers, Aragorn responds in kind by cutting off his head. No, he doesn't actually. Aragorn responds as a king should. He doesn't sink to the level of this evil figure, but remains dignified and honours the position held by the figure, vile as he is. This patience and ability to not fall to their level would be remarkably difficult. To not debase yourself and to stand as an example, the way others should act. To do otherwise is to begin to walk the path they have walked. It is not always easy to do the right thing, but it is right nonetheless. Thus the merciless will ever count on mercy, and the liars make use of truth. For if mercy and truth are withheld from the cruel and the lying, they have ceased to be honoured. Essentially, Manwë could not by duress attempt to force Melkor to reveal some true thought and purpose, or if the deceit was spoken, force truth to be spoken. If Melkor said something was true, he would be believed until it was proved false. If he said he would do as Manwë bid, then he must be given a chance to do it. A promise must be given the chance to be fulfilled. The alternative is to grant no mercy, to accept a promise and meet that with your own deceit, removing all possibility of future mercy or understanding. It is unreasonable to offer no chance. At least that's what we are shown again and again in Middle-earth. Pity stays Bilbo's hand in killing Gollum, something later adopted by Frodo. Gandalf does not slay Saruman when he refuses a chance to return to the true path, again and again. Figures who offer pity and mercy risk the chance it will backfire, but there is the chance it could work, and that's why they risk it in the first place. In the war made against Melkor for the sake of elves, Melkor was defeated and was bound with the chain and Gainor, made by the Valar Apologetics. Melkor was taken by force to Valinor, laying upon his face at the feet of Manwë in the Ring of Doom, Mahanaxar. He sued for pardon. His prayer at this time was denied, and he was cast into prison in the fastness of Mandos, a place none can escape, even one as great as Melkor. He was to remain for 3 ages, to be tried anew, with another chance to plead for pardon. Why wasn't Melkor trusted at this moment? Why was he imprisoned? This force and restraint used upon Melkor by the united Valar was a punishment for his evil deeds. All could not just be forgiven in a moment. Justice had to be served. They did not attempt to extort a confession, which was needless, and importantly, they did not compel him to reveal his thought, which Tolkien describes as unlawful, even if not in vain. This term unlawful refers to the Aksani, the laws and rules primarily proceeding from Eru. They were laid down upon the Valar by Eru, and those who would stay true to Eru would follow them, but it was possible to disobey them, as Melkor would demonstrate with his evil deeds. The Aksani differ from the Unati in that they are not forced, the Unati being a reminder of the existence of Eru and his own invincibility, rules that were impregnable by force, a source of Melkor's own rage, as he could not order Ea without any limits or obstacles to his will, as universal unbreakable rules had been placed by Eru. The Valar could and would not attempt to break the unbreakable laws, but would also not break the breakable laws and rules set upon them. In this case, it is an Aksan universal that none shall directly by force or indirectly by fraud take from another what he has a right to hold and keep as his own. The Valar were then punishing Melkor by depriving him for a set period of time the power to act. To punish him, yes, as who would want to be deprived of their freedom, but to also allow him to stop and consider himself, mercy allowing some possibility of repentance and amendment, to aid in the healing of Arda, but of Melkor himself. Tolkien reminds us that Melkor, despite his evil deeds, still has the gift of free will, the right to exist and to act and use his gifts, for good or ill. If he was to be forced onto a path of good through the threat of destruction by Eru or his agents, what's the point of free will existing in the first place? With Manwë, he had been given authority to rule and order the world as far as he could, for the well-being of Eru's children, the first of whom had just awoken. But again, if Melkor would repent and return to the allegiance of Eru, he would have to be given his freedom again to prove it. The duty of Manwë, a duty none other shared, was to retain all his subjects in the allegiance of the One, or bring them back to it, and in that allegiance leave them free. It was not until there seemed to be no hope left of Melkor's return to the allegiance of Eru that Eru himself deemed that Melkor should be thrown down utterly, deprived forever of all the power to do or to undo. He was thrust through the door of night, beyond the walls of the world into the timeless void, by the express command of Eru and by his power, even if the Valar were the agents of Melkor's defeat. Manwë had seemingly taken his authority and mercy as far as they could be stretched, and the One sealed the fate of Melkor, placing him outside the borders of Manwë's realm. Who among the Eldar hold that the captivity of Melkor and Mandos, which was achieved by force, was either unwise or unlawful? Yet the resolve to assault Melkor, not merely to withstand him, to meet violence with wrath to the peril of Arda, was taken by Manwë only with reluctance. But Tolkien asks the question, what did the imprisonment of Melkor achieve? Melkor was removed from the world for a period of time, relieving Middle-earth from the relentless pressure of his malice and evil will. But his imprisonment did not eradicate the evil he had already sown. That wasn't possible unless maybe Melkor repented. This may not have even been possible then, as the power he had removed from himself to poison the world was now a part of the world, and not under the control of his will. Arda was marred. The seeds that the hand sows will grow and multiply, though the hand be removed. Still, Melkor did not repent, and it can be argued that his imprisonment only made Melkor a more devious opponent. His humiliation led him to become more cunning in his lies, more wicked in his revenge, and cruel. Tolkien says that the weakest and most imprudent of all Manwë's actions, to many, was the release of Melkor from captivity. His release would lead to the death of the two trees, the rebellion of the Noldor, and even greater war in Middle-earth. Yet through this suffering there came also, as maybe in no other way could it have come, the victory of the Elder Days, the downfall of Angband, and the last overthrow of Melkor. This is one of Tolkien's main arguments. If Melkor had been held in captivity, would less evil have followed? Manwë as king had made a promise, the release of Melkor after a time to show that he had changed, to allow that chance. If Manwë broke that promise, even with good intentions, he would have been deceitful and would have taken a step upon the paths of Melkor. Much like Gandalf or Galadriel can speak of using Sauron's truly evil One Ring for good purposes in order to overthrow them, they themselves would replace him, stepping onto the path he had already walked upon, wisdom dictating that this would be foolish. Replacing a tyrant with another tyrant with his or her own good intentions. Not the right path, the easy path. This is a perilous step for Manwë, who would have immediately ceased to be the vicegerent of Eru, but simply a king taking advantage over a rival whom he has conquered by force. Melkor's further evil upon his release may or may not have been averted, but Arda would instead have had the Elder King himself lose any honour he held, and the world would become rent between two lords striving for the throne. Manwë held his honour, the Valar held their honour. It is Melkor who falls, and Manwë who remains in the end. They did not lower themselves to Melkor's level, they did not challenge his deception and malice with their own. And while we may say that the Elder King made some mistake by keeping his word and releasing Melkor when he promised he would, his honour remaining intact ensured that it was only one of the mighty Valar who fell to depravity and tyranny. Any one of the Valar might have taken the paths of Melkor and became like him. And I'm sure we all agree with Tolkien's last words on this matter. One was enough. Thank you for watching. This was a discussion of Tolkien's thoughts and my own on how the Valar dealt with Melkor, told to us in the Osanwi Kenta, in the resume of Pengalloth's discussion. This is a vast topic and I haven't covered all there is to say about Melkor's evil and the role of the Valar, but I wanted to limit my discussion to one of Tolkien's great essays that is now easily accessible in The Nature of Middle-earth, once only being available in the linguistic journal Vinyar Tengwar. I want to thank longtime supporter Patricia for 3 years of support, and to members of the Valinor tier on Patreon, Victus, Oliver, Moses, NCV and Seraphim, for your very generous support and contributions. And as I always like to say, everything I have shared here is through my own research and interpretation. No one else has written this material for me, and you will be able to see on screen and in the description all references including text sources, music and artists. Thank you.